This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From NotAPipePublishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is jukebox.
If I take my time.
Hail and well met, readers and reviewers. Welcome to Writers Not Writing. I'm very excited about today's show. So today we have Brian U. Garrison. Brian is a poet who lives under a tall leafy tree in Portland, Oregon. He once thought he would study computer science and artificial intelligence until he decided that neuroscience and meat-brain intelligence were much more interesting. His words have orbited Mars, popped out of vending machines, waited at bus stops, and been printed in many different sized fonts. He helps keep things running at the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association and manages the SFPA's online poetry magazine, Eye to the Telescope. His two chapbooks include New Yesterdays, New Tomorrows, and Micropoetry for MicroPlanets. Brian U. Garrison is online at bugthewriter.com. Welcome, Brian. Very glad to have you here today.
Hello, yeah, thanks for letting me come and hang out for a bit.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate that you went all out. So as regular listeners know, or regular viewers know, we dress up in costume for this show. But the folks on the podcast can't see what we're wearing. So Brian, tell the podcast listeners about your costume for today's show.
Yes, so I am super excited to be showing off my two-dimensional Super Mario outfit. You can see I've got the lovely cap, the spiffy overalls. They're the white ones because I got the star power to shoot fireballs, you know, always a nice, good power up.
Oh, yes.
And so you'll notice here too, like if I turn sideways, you know, the 2D is really shows up. Like you can't see me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That is very cool. That is a great effect. Well, I have been feeling guilty about my diet and workout regimen, so I went with Kirby because I felt like that, you know, still I've got the Nintendo vibe, but also this reflects the way I've been eating lately. Just voraciously. If I turn to the side, I look roughly the same. So that's awesome. So welcome. I have been very excited to talk to you about what's been going on with the Regional Arts Council. So tell everybody about your work there.
Yeah, so the RACC is a granting organization here in the Portland area. And so I've applied a couple times, but finally they decided, hey, we like this proposal that you sent in.
Awesome.
I'm willing to pay a little money toward it and support my art. And so with that grant, I have my book Micropoetry for MicroPlanets that talks about the dwarf stars, or the dwarf planets rather. So I said, hey, I want to share about this to students who would be learning about the solar system. You know, there's the science of it, the dwarf planets, but also kind of using that as an art side. And so there's kind of like a collision there of these two things that a lot of times are presented in, you know, entirely different classrooms.
Right.
So I can come into high schools and middle schools and kind of talk to the students and share about my interest in that and what I created from that. And so the RACC kind of pays for these school visits for me to come up to a teacher and say, hey, I've got this money that's going to cover the cost of me coming to your classroom. Do you want me to come and hang out? Would that pair well with your curriculum?
Yes, well, and you know, I'm a high school teacher, and Brian is going to be coming to my class too. So I'm absolutely excited about that. And for folks who don't know about the dwarf planets are the one that was demoted and the others that were promoted from asteroid to planet, right? These are the in between an asteroid and a planet dwarf planets, right? Am I describing those correctly?
Yeah, I mean, there's scientific classifications, right? Which I think that's part of what I like to talk to students about is, you know, this is something that we as humans have decided that we're going to slice things this way and say, you know, this is what we consider a planet based on certain measurable things. And so that's one perspective of the world. But, you know, there's the big things that are planets and then these smaller rocks that they've said, well, it's, you know, roundish. So it's not so small that it's, you know, kind of wonky or just some rock. It's, a large enough-ish rock.
Exactly. Yes, it's my wife is a big Pluto is a planet person, and I'm like, this is the is a hot dog a sandwich debate of science. Like this is all about our definitions, not about the actual the constituent parts. We can include those. It doesn't have the a round orbit, and it doesn't even have its moon is as large as it is, and so it's got its actual orbital center is between the two. Like, but this is is a bun bread and is a hot dog your meat. Like that's this is our definitions. But
Yeah.
people can get really fired up about it. Poor Pluto. They feel really badly for Pluto.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things too to in researching and learning about some of the different planets, like none of them really have a whole lot going for them in terms of, hey, like if humans want to go and hang out there, like it's not really conducive to that. So that's one of the other things that I like to try to impress on the students is like, space is a cold place. There's all these other rocks that like, sure, we can look at them, learn about them, see what's going on, see how that interacts with like us spinning around on Earth and orbiting the sun. But Earth, it has, trees, it has grass, it has oxygen. We can just kind of breathe naturally. If, our AC goes out, like we still have air coming in through the windows. Like we should take care of it probably and, do good for it.
Yeah, I mean, I am a big believer that it is a really good idea to, in the long run, be exploring and having a plan B in case, an asteroid hits the Earth. Like I believe in space colonization, but also we really should recognize making Earth habitable is far cheaper than terraforming anywhere else, far more practical. Like we have a livable world, let's keep it that way. And also designing having a plan B is all well and good, but don't think plan B is going to be nicer. Every place other than Earth wants to kill you. It will be a
Right.
really
And
awful place to be.
yeah, and certainly like the timeline for a plan B, right?
Yeah,
Like we're not anywhere close.
nowhere near.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I am a big believer that space exploration is for the benefits on Earth. Like we should really be engaged in it because, going to the moon gave us the phone in my pocket and titanium for wheelchairs that folks can lift into their cars. Like it's really valuable for the
Hmm.
benefits for home, and it doesn't involve, the only other way that we learn as fast as we learn when we are exploring is war. And I'd much rather have us exploring than, but it's not because this is going to solve all of our problems by having a huge population living on Mars anytime soon,
Right, right.
or Enceladus or Titan or something. That's really cool. And how do kids, I mean, what has been your response from the students?
Yeah, so one of the things that I kind of start with is kind of showing perspective, right? So here's the sun and it's pretty big and like here's Texas. It's kind of the size of maybe one of the smaller lava bubbles on the sun. And so
Yeah.
there's, a student whose mind was kind of like totally blown, just starting to like comprehend some of the scale there. And so, kind of going through there's the big planets, and Jupiter is near and dear to my heart. But
Yeah.
since it's a presentation about the dwarf planets, I try not to let them in on that too much.
Yeah.
And then kind of getting into that. So kind of going from the science side and then getting into the poetry and kind of talking about some of that, like, there's the scientific perspective, like we're talking about of carving it up and like this is what we call a planet, this is what we call a dwarf planet. But also kind of just getting into perspectives more broadly of like, there's different ways of seeing the world and thinking about the world. And as, high school students, you'll go and learn some specialty, like maybe some of you will go be engineers. And maybe you'll need to know about understanding a building and certain elements of that building that will make it be able to stand up, right? Engineering, particularly, structural engineering is one way of seeing the world. And, we need a range of perspectives because once an engineer builds that building, there's going to be someone that comes along and takes care of that and has to like tend to it over the 30 to 100 years or 150 years that it's standing up. And to be an engineer takes a certain knowledge and ability to kind of bring into that. And the caretaking brings another expertise that you need to be able to be able to attend to that long term.
Yeah.
And there are caretakers of building, there's caretakers of people. which is a whole different, expertise and knowledge set. And maybe kind of on the building side of things, maybe there are activists that are like, well, hey, is this the type of building that we need right here, right now? So between, science and poetry as a way of starting to introduce the idea of, well, there are different ways of thinking about these planets scientifically. You can start to kind of come at it from a different angle, and what are some of the questions that poets ask, or different ways of comparing two different things, that, the scientists have decided this is how we're going to talk about them, versus, well, one of the dwarf planets has a ring around it. Maybe one way that we were to slice up planets were to say, well, this is Saturn and this is this dwarf planet with a ring. And, Neptune actually has, a very thin ring. That would be another way of grouping it, another perspective. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's I love that idea. Well, and that's a really, really helpful metaphor for thinking about poetry, because poetry is hard to describe in terms of, here is this objective, concrete purpose. If people are very, very linear and concrete, and we're saying, no, poetry is this wonderful way to see the world differently that is valuable, but helping folks see that through a metaphor is nice and poetic too, you know.
right. And even
But
like
yeah,
day job wise, like I do other things beyond poetry. So
right.
in terms of like being what I'm doing is informed by the other perspectives that I hold and consider and spend time with. So all of that kind of informs even when I'm doing like data work, like I have to be able to interpret numbers, but then I also have to interpret the graphs and know what's important. So
Yeah, one of the metaphors I use in my classroom is for the students who know chess. I talk about how, if when you're looking at a chessboard from the side, if the board were, even kind of parallel to where you are sitting, it is easy to see the way the rook moves. It is easy to see the way the pawns move. But every once in a while, it's a really good idea to shift yourself so you are seeing the board diagonally, so you can see the way the bishops might move and the way that the queen might move. And poetry is that shifting. We're still looking at the same world, but we're seeing it from a different angle, and it can be, it can help us understand it more fully. And if we only see it in this rigid way, then yes, we can build the building and never ask ourselves, why do we need this building? Which is a really
yeah.
important question. Oh, that's great. So, but not to get too much into process, because this is a show about procrastination. So, what you've got a lot going on. What has been pulling you away from your work lately in terms of entertainment, pop culture, that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, bit of a I like to go out to live entertainment, and so one thing that actually I have coming up here in just a couple hours, I'll be going to Cirque du Soleil, go see some acrobats jump around, and yeah, last time that I went and saw that many years ago, I was running around the house afterward, and it's kind
Have you
of
been before? So you went. How many times have you been? Like when was your first Cirque du Soleil experience?
um probably 15 years ago or so. I had gone to like some other like neighborhood circuses, some small
Yeah.
tent stuff that was a little more like the standard, like orange and yellow kind of tent out on the
Yeah.
grass kind of situation. Then I did see a Cirque show that was in one of the like bigger arenas, uh, probably 15 years ago. So that was a
Oh,
lot of fun to
so
see. It's a
cool.
whole different
Yeah.
world from what I think of like old-timey circuses of, okay, you got like one person who does, a few things. They've really got a whole bunch of a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
mean it's
coordination.
Broadway show meets circus. Like
Yeah.
it's so involved, and the special effects are phenomenal, and the actors are doing, these acrobats are doing incredible. I saw it as a kid. My folks had taken us to like, I lived in San Diego, and they'd take us to like Ringling Brothers, which now I look back and I know that Ringling Brothers is like super sketch. Like, the way they treat their animals is highly questionable. And then we went to a Cirque show, and it just blew every other kind of circus out of the water with no animals, with and no at the time there was no English spoken in it. These the French Canadian artists didn't do anything in French either. It was just music and mime, and it was, and I still remember some of the moments from that show that were so amazing, and I've seen them a couple of times since. And yeah, you are in for a treat. It's really, really cool, kind of levels of artistry. So yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool things about it too. Like you mentioned, the music, like that was one of the things that kind of just blew me away is like they have this whole original thing, the score that runs through the whole thing. I listened to the soundtrack somewhat obsessively right
Yeah.
afterward, and like, 15 years later, I'm still pull it up now and then, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, like this is what I'm gonna like have going, and it's yeah, really phenomenal.
That's a good call. I should look up some of the Cirque soundtracks as like background tracks for like writing in my classroom. Like, the language is not going to be distracting. So if people just need music, that could be, because it's really fun and there's a emotional arc through the course of the show because
Hmm.
they tell a story. So yeah, but they do it all with music and lighting and the various acts. And yeah, that'd be a good one. So what else have
Yeah,
you seen live
Allegria was
recently?
the first one that I saw was Allegria, and when I first looked it up, there's actually like two different soundtracks for it. And so like the first one that I was listening to, I was like, wait, this isn't, why do I not like, I'm not feeling that same joyous love of it. And then I found that, oh, here's like the one that was the version that I had kind of seen.
Yeah. What's the was one poppier and one more the opera or what was the
I didn't
differences?
listen, I haven't listened to the other one enough.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else? You go to a lot of live stuff. What else have you been seeing lately?
Yeah, so recently, one artist that I've followed for a while is Michaela Davis. So she plays the harp. I think she had primarily done like solo the harp and singing when she was kind of starting out. Now she's got like a group that she tours around with. Some of her music's kind of inspired by like Grateful Dead kind of stuff. So she's this wonderful harp player, but I went down to the pub that's where
Yeah.
next door, and it's just kind of seeing somebody rock out with a harp and some guitars and drums.
If
So that was a lot
so,
of
I
fun.
didn't realize how cool a harp is, like until I saw it live. So, folks out there, if you can find somebody who plays the harp, it's really an incredible instrument. But the poet Bethany Lee, who I highly recommend her work, also plays harp, and so she would do it at her readings. She'd read a poem, play a song, like, and I would just sit there and just be blown away. So. Yeah, Bethany Lee, and I will look up Michaela Davis. That sounds really cool. And Bethany would just do it by herself, but well, sometimes I think there might have been piano accompaniment, but most of the time it was just her. But I would love to see a band with with a full harp because they're wild. They're enormous. Like,
Yeah,
it's a lot. She was, Bethany was telling me just like hauling it around. Her day job is she goes and plays harp like at nursing homes, that kind of thing. She like is, called into places just
yeah,
to be there to kind of provide this musical kind of care for people, which is really cool. But yeah, that would be that'd be a great addition to a band. Or as the almost the singer, like this instrument is, that's
right.
cool.
Yeah, no, growing up, I did listen to a lot of Cake. There's another band that I know that's called Zox. But yeah, I think one of the interesting things about some of those bands is so like Cake has a trumpet that is kind
Yeah.
of this character that you don't see a lot in kind of like a rock band. And then with Zox, theirs is a fiddle, so an electric
Yep.
fiddle or violin is kind of playing along with all of these other kind of just kind of standard rockish kind of sound.
I'm blanking on the name of the band. Aqualung. They had a flute.
Hold on. Okay.
Who was that had their big hit was Aqualung. It was one of their, oh gosh, people out there are listening and they are screaming at their car radios right now. They're like, I can't believe. Oh, I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. But yes, I totally get it. Where you've got some instrument, although it does make me think of the more cowbell. Like some, it can get to be a little sticky, but it is really cool when a band can employ it well. There's some, bands that have violin that, it makes the sound.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so one of the other I am really into I enjoy the different sounds of the different instruments, right? The timbre.
Yeah.
Um and then so actually so Timber Bound is another instrument or another group that I've listened to for a while. So my neighbor growing up is the guy that plays the banjo in it. But it's kind of a folksy group.
Yeah.
They've got four. They've got the banjo, guitar, and then fiddle and um,
Freestanding bass.
Like yeah. So
Yeah.
they've got a bass and a mix of a few different things. But yeah, so it's kind of folksy. Their origins kind of come from this songbook that was written by people out where I grew up. So I grew up outside of Portland, about an hour in the woods. And so Timberbound, the songbook was, these people who were out working either at the timber mill or actually falling the trees. And,
Yeah.
they had these instruments as their entertainment. And yeah, to just have a bunch
That's
of songs
really
that
cool. Like because I don't think of the musical tradition of Oregon, but there have been people, here for thousands and thousands of years. But there have, been folks working in the timber industry for, a hundred and something years, and would have had a whole musical tradition. Is it heavily? I would think it's heavily influenced by kind of, Appalachian sound because you've got folks, uh, same instruments, and does it sound like bluegrassy?
well, so I think one of the songs from there maybe or uh is possibly inspired by like Woody Guthrie, so a little bit of
Yeah,
those kinds of sounds. They had also participated in there was a CD that Folkways I think had put out that was a tribute to Woody Guthrie. So a whole bunch of different groups kind of playing some of his tunes from
yeah,
when the electric company come and had him write some propaganda in favor of damming the river.
yeah.
But yeah, so there's those songs that he had written that a lot of those borrowed the tunes from other songs. But then also, Woody Guthrie's tunes being kind of employed or things that have a little bit of that sound.
And is there like a little, pro-labor, in the lyrics too? I mean, these are, workers who are inspired by Guthrie. I would think that's, these are proto-socialists. Like,
Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that stands out is like a waltz, and it's about kind of like coming home afterward and like, let's have a beer together kind of thing.
yeah,
So yeah, it's very down to earth.
yeah. Oh, that's great. I like talking about Timberbound. So that's cool. So what else has been pulling you away in terms of going out and seeing live stuff?
Yeah, so music is some of the ones that I've been seeing lately, but this year we did get a subscription to the Broadway in Portland. So excited to see some of the musicals that are on the lineup. So Peter Pan will be the first, which, we'll kind of see how that is. They had sent out a thing of saying like, hey, there will be kids in the theater, so don't be shushing them
Yeah,
intensely. Like we're here to have some fun and enjoy it, and we're not gonna try to be snobs about it.
yeah.
I'm excited for Wicked. Uh, I had gone and saw that actually in New York recently, and it was
Oh, cool.
I had kind of mixed feelings, but I think I was like just so wowed because we had saw also uh what is it? The Lion King, right? Which is just such a phenomenal performance, like all around, like four-dimensional kind of situation. And then like I saw Wicked, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's okay.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and then like afterward, I, kind of processing, I'm like, no, like it's, amazing and phenomenal and top of the line. So I'm excited to kind of go see it again and be a little bit less
Yes.
hoity-toity about it.
Well, I'm just, a different angle again because you didn't just see this other thing. We went and
Right.
saw Hamilton last time we were in New York. What was that not this last Christmas break, but the Christmas break before. And I mean, it is so incredible. And then we had talked about, oh, we could go see. I think Hugh Jackman was in not Greatest Showman, that's the film, but Music Man, I think. It was
Okay.
one of
Yeah,
his
yeah.
last performances, and we couldn't get tickets. And then we got tickets to see Hamilton, went and saw Hamilton, and then we were like, it may have been a letdown afterwards, which would be really unfair. But it's not a show that moves me as much as Hamilton. So yeah, the proximity to something else can totally change the perspective on that. So, what is something that has been a news story that has been pulling you away from your work lately?
Oh man, yeah, no. We are in the joy of politics at the moment, so I've been trying to avoid too much of that, but with the political conventions kind of going on, like it's hard to ignore it too much. So,
It has
um
been nice to have hope and joy be a main part of it, though. I'm a political junkie to my own detriment, like where I'm like, you know, I get, people can bait me into getting angry and, and I'm like, this is new.
Right. Yeah.
Joy and laughter in our politics. It's really pretty wonderful.
Yeah, it's definitely been a shift in recent months as some of the things have gone through. Like, part of the reason I'm trying to avoid the news is it's not that I'm voting any differently than what I
Right.
did in,
Yep.
8 years ago or 4 years ago, or,
Yeah.
there are things that probably aren't going to change my mind between then and now. But yeah, certainly with the change in lineup, I had been kind of seeing some of the other speeches, and then I did wind up uh, seeing people talk about the other speeches, and I was like,
Yes.
maybe, it'd be kind of interesting to see what's going on. And the other day I did actually catch Kamala's, and yeah, just a lot of energy, a lot of interest, and yeah, excitement about what the possibilities lie ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of it, I admit, I'm catching in like little clips, and the clip of Tim Wall's kids when he was up on the stage. Have you seen that one? Uh, his
Oh,
son
I think I've
just
seen some of the photos, but yeah.
Yes, yes, his son is just overwhelmed with emotion. That's my dad. Like he's, crying and it's wonderful. And
Hmm.
predictably, people are like, "Oh, that's terrible that this young man is crying." And I'm like, his father is on a national stage and he's proud of his father. How
Yeah,
great is
absolutely.
that? And so it was, yeah, it was very interesting to see how people responded to an overwhelming positive show of emotion for one's father. Like, why is that
Hmm.
such a terrible thing? But it a lot of people revealed a lot more about themselves than they revealed about the moment.
Yeah,
Like
a
that.
lot of gender expectations start to kind
Yes.
of weave themselves in, and all
Yeah.
sorts of yeah.
But it was nice to get to see some really wholesome moments and some some real fun. I don't know if you saw the clip of the roll call is always like the most boring part, where they're just like, and the next state, yes, we cast our votes for, and the next state, and the Dems to try and liven it up, brought in like musical numbers for every state and chose songs that where the bands had to communicate to the Trump campaign, please stop playing our song. And so it was all, I mean, it was just this, high level trolling. And then Georgia had Lil Jon, and he was in person, and they basically made it a music video for Georgia's roll call vote. And it was hilarious and wonderful. And like the whole place is going, nuts. Changed it from turn down for what to turn up, show up for what or whatever. Like, like it was really fun. So yes,
Nice.
I highly recommend to everyone out there, find this joy in this. Like this, it has been really great to to have joy back in our politics. So what
Yeah, I
else has
saw the
been
headline for
catching
that
your
one, but
attention?
I'll have to scope it out.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
you'll
so
you'll get a kick out of it. It's really fun.
yeah, so I mean, certainly there's the joy on the one side, and then kind of the terror of like what other possibilities lie around the corner.
Yeah,
And it's just kind of, certainly drama one way or another. And so in terms of trying to like survive, it's like, okay, well, we'll get through the whole like politicking and fighting and see what happens post November.
yeah,
But yeah, it's just kind of interesting because I feel like the political drama, like on the big stage, isn't necessarily the only shakeups that are kind of going on. I feel like there's just a lot of that, particularly in places that I'm connected to. So like, there's the Unitarian Universalist Church here in Portland that I've been going to. And for folks that aren't aware of it, it's kind of I always kind of tense up a little bit when I tell somebody that like I
yeah,
go to church, but it's like this is the church where like there's no real cosmology that they actually subscribe to. Like they might ask you if you have one that you believe in and accept and think deeply about. And they'll be like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Like that's great that
yeah.
you think there are 700 gods or there's one God or there's no God. Like we'll get along here and figure out, you know, play nicely and yeah.
Yeah, which, and I was raised in a far more dogmatic, Presbyterian still, but and I'm not a Christian anymore, but that was, very much part of my upbringing. I remember jokes about Unitarians because there's a frustration among people who are really committed to dogma when they see other people building community and being, joyful without it. They're like, wait a second, they can just get together and they don't even have to believe the same things and they can all hang out and create a community. That's really annoying to us, and so they would kind of, they don't believe in anything. Well, they've created this wonderful community. So yeah, I dig the Unitarians. They're pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I had heard a few Unitarian jokes growing up, but I never understood it until later in life. I was like, oh wait, I see what's going on here.
Yep.
But yeah, so in terms of like the drama, there's some shakeup there. There was an ousting of someone on staff that, has been hurtful to a lot of the people there and understandably, it was a bit of a surprise to some. So, going through some shakeups there. My day job workplace, there was a high level person that, had also got ousted and, kind of recovering from various damage of what happened before that and kind of the fallout from the ousting. Just kind of like, and it's a small organization. So where I work day job wise, it's like, 20 to 25 people. So someone in the higher up getting, chased away is, it affects everybody
Right.
fairly closely.
Oh yeah. Well, I appreciate that the kind of recognition that that is politics too. Like that, I will frequently come across people who will say, I don't pay attention to politics, and I'm like, when you were 16 and trying to decide which parent to ask for keys to the car, that is a political decision. Who has the power to say yes? Like, and who is more likely to give me what I want? These politics is all around us, and yeah, navigating that and navigating them and recognizing that these decisions that people with power can make can be very painful. And how do we manage that and care for one another? So yeah, that's particularly tricky in a church where people are going, I don't have to be here. If this place gets too uncomfortable for me, this is a entirely voluntary organization, and so yeah, hurt feelings can really spiral out of control very quickly and be toxic in that community. Have folks done some kind of healing work to come together again in the wake of that?
Yeah, so I mean there's leading of discussions and kind of sharing what information can be shared.
Right.
There's, in all of the different things, it's always a matter of SIFWA is another one of those that's kind of going through a lot
Yes.
of shakeup and trying to figure out, what's the path forward. And,
Yeah.
that's mired in a lot of the tension between what can be shared, what should be shared, what shouldn't be shared. And I think that causes a lot of difficulty in trying to navigate something where, you want there to be transparency, but then also, there's just things that aren't for the open
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, for folks listening, SIFWA is the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association, and we got an email saying the president was stepping down, and you never know, is it family reasons, what all's going on, or is there some kind of internal stuff? And then the vice president stepped down, and so you start to go, okay, there's more than just this leadership vacuum. Now the person stepping into that position has stepped down, and I've heard rumors that there are some staffs, folks as well. And so then people go to the board and say, tell us what's going on. And the board rightly is saying, these are staffing issues. We can't share. And that's, you're right. It's very tricky. How do, people are curious and want to know about kind of the health of their organization. And at the same time, there's things that can't be shared because you've got to respect people's privacy. And so yeah, that's been really tricky and interesting to, and so then we're just piecing it together from the little we know, which is, you know, th through a veil darkly, trying to understand what is happening there.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly stirring the pot, and then there's, trying to be a force for having discussion, and there's merit to trying to find the way to manage those multiple perspectives and multiple ways of getting at, hey, what's the next step? What do we do better? And yeah, I think that, it's certainly a heavy load as there's lots of chaos kind of going around, but, I think that if there are good leaders that we can find and good leaders that step forward, I think there's, certainly a path forward in all of these different places where there's just chaos. And,
Well,
you were
I'm
talking
going to
about kind of
totally
the
put you
different.
on the spot in the midst of, you've got an audience now, and have you thought about running for the board for SIFWA?
For SIFWA, well, I mean, so I've been pretty involved with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Poetry Association.
Right.
So that
That's why I'm thinking it would be good to have a poet on the board. That would be really, that could be good for the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association. And apparently there are board spots open.
yeah, it
Make this
eats up a
major
lot of my
life
time right
decision
now
on
helping
the
to run
spot in front of people.
SFPA. But yeah,
But
so
I actually
certainly
thought about it because I served on the board of the Oregon Education Association, and I loved that board work, and that can be really valuable. But I just became a member of SIFWA like a year and a half ago, and according to the bylaws, you have to be a member for 2 years, which is a good rule. So I was like, oh, good, this decision is taken from me. I can't do that right now. Which, my wife was like, what were you even thinking? Why would you add something else to your plate? And I'm like, yeah, but board work is. I was also asked to be on the Oregon Poetry Association board. And I was like, maybe, no, don't add anything else right now. But that it's valuable work, and those people they're volunteers who do great work for us, but it's I think it can be really fun. So
right.
we'll see. Maybe someday. Maybe someday I will be saying to you, Brian, we need you on the board.
We'll see.
So what else has been pulling you away? We've got. Oh, I did want to ask you, have you seen, this is interesting, speaking of local politics, we're going to have a ballot initiative about universal basic income here in Oregon. So that's one where I think a lot of folks don't know about. It doesn't get, the press of, the kind of back and forth of a big, national political campaign. But we may have we may perform an interesting experiment here in the state of Oregon. Have you heard about this, Bill?
Yeah, I did start to hear a little bit about it. Certainly, as we move toward a society where there's not a whole lot of jobs for people, I think it is important to discuss what the future looks like, how we're going to take care of people. And there's been kind of traditionally someone could go work and contribute, and we are beholden to the dollar because there's not really a whole lot of, if you own a house, if you rent an apartment, if you live in a tent, there's not a lot of like space around where you can go and like plant some corn and then like
Right.
wait 8 months and then go and
Yeah.
harvest that and like expect that you're going to be able to do that for your food that you need to eat for the year. So we do need to investigate all sorts of different ways. And, UBI is the universal basic income has sounded like something that could be helpful for kind of unshackling some of that burden of like, how is everybody going to take care of themselves? Because the dollar is what we currently run on, and that's what we need to be able to survive in the world. Whether you can, turn a screw in a particular way or, do some calculations and contribute in that way. It's difficult to see for some people how they're going to be able to earn an income when turning the screws is automated. And
Yeah.
now what you've spent 30 years learning how to do that. What are you going to go do instead?
Yeah. Well, and I think of the way that the UBI is going to be potentially a way to recapture the labor we all put in to train the AI. The AIs exist because we gave them our data and our work, and every single time you had suggested text and you chose a text, you were working for a company that is reaping a benefit, right? And to then say, hey, when these companies put you out of work with a robot that you helped design, you should tax that company and get your money back. And so that may be a way, as the robots do more and more of the work, for the people to recover some of what we put in, and to think of it as we did the labor. That UBI is earned income.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but what comes to mind as well is Kurt Vonnegut's book Player Piano, which I had reread recently, and there's a lot of parts to that book that don't hold up over time. But one of the examples, because it does deal a lot with the automation, because at the time it was, you'd have someone that would make a table leg and you put the wood on the lathe
Yeah.
and then you have your little thing and you carve it in just the right way and out comes this table leg. And well, you have people, so sometimes they've, been fighting at home or they come in drunk or, so you have to scrap so many of the table legs. And so you implement this process where the human teaches the robot, like you're saying, how to make that table leg. And so like he's literally training himself out of a job. Um, and so you see this character who's like at the pub and doesn't have any money, but he's the one who this robot can now do 800 million table legs without getting tired. And,
Yeah.
you don't have quite as much variance. You don't have to throw away as many. So like it's good for the productivity of table leg makers, but in terms of like all the humans that
Yeah.
contributed to building up that company and et cetera, yeah, like it just
Well, I
get
think
tough
a
to
lot
frustrate.
about that, the kind of level of quality there too. It could be that the table leg maker made better table legs, but the robot can make them and they're only slightly inferior, and there are no errors, and there are 800 of them, and they're working all night. And from the company's perspective, lowering the quality but producing more of them and I think about that in terms of our industry, in terms of mine as a teacher. Like, yeah, having an AI video that we throw on for students will not be as good as an actual human being that they can connect with. But if the test
Right.
scores are only a little lower that they produce, I could totally imagine a system saying, scrap the human teachers. We've got robots that are almost as good. That's
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because like over time, like part of that depends on that they've been used to having this structure. And so the structure kind of exists for a little while, but as that wears away, like would the AI actually be able to run it as well? Or is that just because there are certain expectations and structures in place that kind of continue to exist for a
right.
few years?
Yeah, yeah, I think that, yeah, you're right. It will create a kind of calcification. The AI is not going to go, let's innovate and do this in a new way. It's going to say, I'm still trying to do it just as well as the programmers can imagine. And so, yeah, that's going to be we are going to live through a really exciting, interesting time in terms of, what happens when all of the truck drivers are out of work. How are they going to handle that? Like that's, it's going to be an interesting it has been interesting, and the exciting times are not going to end. you know. Uh, so outside of politics at the various levels of politics, what is a
Right, right.
hobby that has been pulling you away from your work lately?
Yeah, so one hobby that has carried through my life for quite a while is ultimate frisbee.
Yes.
Or ultimate. So there's, we tend to call it a disc instead of a frisbee because there's this company called Whammo who
Yep.
holds the trademark to this term called frisbee. Although one interesting factoid is there are professional leagues now, and they recently changed their name to the Ultimate Frisbee Association. So the UFA, for some reason, swerving around the opportunity to be the organization, the UFO, the
Ah,
Ultimate Frisbee
okay, I can
Organization.
see that. Yeah.
But yeah, they did. They're in cahoots now with Whammo, and Whammo is the official maker of the disc. I haven't thrown one of the new Whammo ones,
Are they
but yeah, when I first
175?
started playing Ultimate, we would sneer. So there's, just different brands who
Yeah.
make the disc. And
Are they 175 gram, the Whammo ones? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so they're generally the same size, slightly different plastic and maybe slightly different mold or whatever. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
I love Ultimate Frisbee. It is that was as close to athleticism as I got in college. Like I was, we played Ultimate almost, it felt like it was every day we played some. It was really great. It's a great uh sport and just a ton of fun. So
yeah,
how often do you get out there?
yeah. So I tend to play about once a week
That's
at the
still
moment. So
really
there
good. I
are
mean,
leagues here
I
in the
wish I
area that
played that often.
I connected with and teams. In the summer, there's a few tournaments. So one of my favorite tournaments is out in Seaside. We play on the beach with a smaller field than what we play on in the grass, so that we don't get so tired running through the
Yeah.
sand. But yeah, I love the beach ultimate because there's a lot more diving. You can jump and lay out for the disc and grab it, and when you fall, it's not quite as, there's less impact. It kind of has
Yeah.
a little more give when you hit the sand,
But I would think a
hitting
lot
the
of wind.
grass. What's that?
Is it figuring out the wind on a given, I mean, on the beach? That would be, that's a lot of wind to deal with sometimes.
Yeah, so certainly the wind can be a tough one. You know, after having played for 20 plus years, I've gotten a little better handle of throwing in the wind.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly like it took probably 5 to 10 years for me to get, okay-ish at throwing in heavy wind. So
Yeah.
it's always a concern. And even like in mid-level tournaments when we go in somewhere there's like wind that's fairly one way
Yeah.
toward one of the end zones, it'll be every score is downwind because just throwing it up
Yeah.
into the wind can be so tough.
Well, and the wind on a beach is so inconsistent. You've got, I mean,
Yeah.
it's easier when you're playing here in the valley, and even if it's a decent breeze, it's going one way and it tends to be pretty constant. And you can go, okay, we're always going to curve this way. We're fighting into this wind in this way. But yeah, if you're at the beach, uh, somebody who is spoiled by the weather here in the valley, and then I go to the beach and I'm like, we can't even connect with each other out here on the beach on a particularly windy day. But that is great. That's a great, great sport. And so, yeah. So, are you? Has the tournament season kind of ended for the year, or is it still anything coming up?
So the team that I play with is actually up in the Bellingham area playing a tournament right now.
Oh, fun.
So because I had the Cirque tickets was part of the reason that I didn't wind up going to the tournament. But yeah, it is kind of winding down. So there's nationals for all different levels. They kind of bin it in part by like there's the age group. So you've got the masters and the grandmasters for the people that are getting older like me. So you don't have to play against these young upstarts that are, still good and
I
fast
love
and
the terminology, though. It's not the old fogey league; it's the masters and the grandmasters. That's
right.
great.
So yeah, it's kind of the season of weekend tournaments is winding down, but we're between the summer and the fall season for, the once a week kind of let's go play. So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
that's
it's
great.
always a lot of fun to just it's a great community, great bunch of people. Because it's got its origins from this self-officiation, there's just a whole lot of talk of, hey, how do we respect each other on the field, make sure that we're not bullying each other over. It's officially a non-contact sport, so safety is paramount and making sure that we're out there to have fun. There are recently pro leagues and people are trying to find ways to make money out of this, but we're out here, we're exercising and enjoying the company of each other. So I just really appreciate the community and the attention toward respecting each other that comes from being part of that.
Yeah, I think it's a particularly welcoming community because it started off as, pickup games, and you'd have, eight people on one side and seven on the other, and it was, very ragtag, and it was just this, welcome, come on in, join us, rather than, this incredibly rigid, rule structure. I mean, the rules are very clear. But because its origin was so, so kind of loosey goosey, it tends to be a very welcoming community.
Right. Yeah. I
Really
actually had
enjoyed that.
started kind of down close to you. My brother was in Corvallis at the time. And so I had just graduated high school and went down to kind of stay with him over the summer. And he had been part of this pickup group. And, it was kind of the real kind of low key, like we're going
Yeah,
to take off our shoes and go run
right.
around in the grass and just have some fun and throw the disc and try to catch it.
Yeah, we had some guys at my university up in Washington where they played barefoot, and that was their thing. Like that was, their identity out there was they're the guys who are the barefoot, like, and that was, so yeah, it was not that competitive, like I'm gonna punish you or I'm gonna taunt you or whatever, it was a bunch of hippies running around barefoot having fun.
Yeah.
It was pretty great. So what else has been pulling you away from your work in terms of just, fun and games?
Yeah, so I grew up on a lot of Nintendo. I still play video games now and then. So the newer Zelda game has been we've got the Switch and
Yeah.
playing that. So Tears of the Kingdom, it's a lot of fun, but
It
having
is so visually beautiful compared to the stuff we started with. Like it's,
right.
this beautiful game, and looking back at what Zelda was when it was, the character was 8 blocks. Like it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, definitely. It's changed a lot. It's come a long ways. But certainly in terms of like the the way the game is designed, I feel like they've brought in a lot of kind of casino elements.
Yeah.
Like academically, so I studied psychology, and a little bit kind of on the neuroscience side. But yeah, there's just a lot of things where it's like literally in the game you're very close to like pulling a lever, and then like here's this random stuff that kind of comes out.
Yeah.
Like let's try to build in these different ways of how do we kind of get people to want to come back.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
imagine the vocab term they were using in the development was gamify as a verb all the time, and so they were going, okay, well, the whole thing's a game, but how can we gamify this element and this element
right.
and make everything games within games? But yeah, and you're right, it's the neuroscience. How can we keep them getting their dopamine hits throughout? But it's very
Yeah, and
effective.
like, we have cash in the world and there's all these different things that are trying to be like, oh, here's your like reward bucks and stuff.
Hmm.
In the Zelda game, it's like, well, here's, you've got your rupees still, but now there's all these other little things that
Yeah.
you're trying to collect and build up and like, oh, well, if you don't want to go collect rupees, like maybe one of these other things that, oh, we got to go collect all the little baubles kind of
Well,
thing.
and that one has all you can do a lot of building within it, right? I mean, which is another, hey, I successfully made a boat that sails and floats.
Yeah, it is fun to see like a lot of the free form elements you can kind of go and just explore and build without necessarily the overarching purpose of the designers want you to build this thing. So it's fun to see like them build it out in that way of kind of going into the open world approach
Yeah.
as well.
Okay, well, we're going to go to our commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about lately. Special announcement time. NotAPipePublishing has always been committed to helping authors and readers find one another. Well, the show, which is all about helping readers get to know writers, just hit a milestone: 10,000 views on YouTube. So to celebrate, instead of charging authors to advertise their books on the show, I'm going to run your ads for free throughout 2024. If you want to make a 30 to 60-second video about your book, let folks know what it's about and where to find it, and don't forget your name and the title. I'll run one or two of those in our ad spot each week. Just send an MP4 file to the NotAPipe email address in the show notes. Let's fix up some readers and authors into reader relationships. 2024. More readers, more writers, more books.
Hi, I'm children's author Sarah Geddes. I'd love for you to check out my book, Henry the Sneezing Dragon. It's about a clumsy dragon in search of friendship. My book, To the Moon, a Jacob and Trevor adventure, will be released September 2024, a story about two little boys who use fairy dust to travel to the moon. And in fall 2024, The Water Bear Astronaut, about a tardigrade who travels to space, will also be coming out. All books will be available on Amazon.
No one wants to live in a country ruled by wizards, unless the alternative is worse. Peter Watts, author of Blindside, says, a near-perfect blend of implacable horror, gallows humor, and ecological apocalypse. Nick Namadas, author of The Second Shooter, says, relentlessly radical and often hilarious. Cascade, Book 1 in the Sleep of Reason trilogy, by Rachel A. Rosen. Available now at bookshop.org, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and at bppress.ca.
I'm realizing I need to do a better job of telling folks this. People can't know what we refuse to share. I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I've been doing a ton of work in my yard, and audiobooks have been my constant companions throughout. I know there are some people who say reading an audiobook doesn't count as reading. They are wrong. Reading with your ears requires some of the same skills as reading with your eyes, and some distinct skills, but it's still creating meaning from a text, and it counts. I have 5 of my books out in audiobook on Audible and Amazon. The Convention of Fiends, Book 1, Don't Read This Book, and Book 2, You Were Warned. Corporate High School is narrated by Crystal Kay, and she did an amazing job. I narrated The Digital Storm with some cool voice changer software for some of the characters, so that sounds like a bit of an ensemble. And I recorded one of my collections of poetry, This Uneven Universe, as a gift for my wife Crystal, who wanted to be able to listen to it while driving. So if audiobooks are a way you enjoy reading, check those out. And if you like them, let me know, readers and reviewers. Welcome back, everyone. I'm here with Brian U. Garrison. And Brian, when you've been daydreaming, what have you been daydreaming about lately?
Yeah, so certainly there are various things that I daydream about regularly, but kind of on brand with my background here, as well as the chapbook, the micropoetry for microplanets. I have started to kind of look at what telescope I would want to get. So spend some time, looking at the stars. I did used to have one a while back, and that wound up getting stolen through one means or another. But my partner brought it up of like, hey, like you talk about the stars a lot and kind
Yeah.
of, I've got one of the ones that'll tell me what planet that is when I see something bright and I'm like, ooh, what planet is that? And so she was like, oh, maybe, it's time to get a telescope and we can go out to one of the dark sky places and take a look. So I've started kind of that research side of seeing like what are the modern telescopes, what's the technology that they've got going, and what's something that's affordable because
Right.
you can buy a $300 telescope, you can buy a $300,000 telescope, and certainly that's, I like having a house rather than a
Yeah.
telescope, so
Yeah,
finding the budget.
basically. Sell your house and buy a telescope. Do the new ones have a photograph component kind of built in? Because I've done the thing where you're literally like holding your camera through the lens of, and so then you've added this element that makes the pictures pretty janky. But imagine a lot of folks are doing really cool photography with even reasonably priced ones now.
Yeah, so I mean, if the photography piece is something that someone were interested in, they could kind of go that route. Some of the advice that's out there is saying that if you're buying something that has the certain components in it, you're going to be paying additional to have that. Um, and kind of my mantra is there are lots of great pictures and lots of people doing that astrophotography. So I can go and look up those pictures when I want to see the pictures. Part of the fun for me looking at a telescope, like when I had my previous one, I pointed it at Jupiter and then I was like, oh, okay. And then there's the moons, and like Galileo a long time ago was being thrown in jail by the church for looking at this thing and telling, hey, here's this thing that's going around the sun, that's not going around us. So being able to kind of like experience it, I think is part of the fun for me to have it going into my eyes, have those photons
Yep. And
being
it's your
perceived directly
memory
by
and
me.
not recorded in some other way. Yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of I'm looking for one that wouldn't necessarily have the picture side of it, just because, I do enjoy looking at the pictures, but someone who's got that $300,000 telescope, I can go enjoy the pictures that they managed to capture and, you know, have this little hobby that I'm going to go and occasionally point the telescope at the stars
Well, that's a
and
good
planets.
kind of reminder for me because I am one of these people who, is like content, 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 like, any experience. I must write a poem about this, like, and I have to kind of force myself to go, maybe this could just be a moment that is not documented in any way. It is, that's like you said, it's the experience rather than the documentation of the memory. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
some
but that shopping is also fun too. The research portion. Have you started to go, this is what I'm leaning toward, or are you just at the beginning phases of that?
Yeah, so I mean, there are telescopes that use lenses, there are telescopes that use mirrors, and then in the modern era, there are ones that combine those two things that, so they are getting quite advanced in what you can buy and getting things that have lots of very small moving parts. So, um, yeah, kind of looking at things that I don't know if it's going to be too complex for me to kind of take care of long term,
Yeah.
versus, something that would be powerful enough and trying to understand that balance of like, can always nudge up a little more powerful, but then like, am I kind of pushing into, outside of the budget of what I'm kind of trying to keep within? Um,
And a lens will not decay over time. Like a lens is not, you're not going to have a hardware problem with your lens or a software update that you need for your lens. So, there is certainly merit to the old school material that the telescope with lenses will continue working longer probably than some of these really high tech ones that require a lot of maintenance. Mirrors and lenses retain their qualities for longer. Yeah, that would be fun to, and just the learning about them, I imagine, is fun too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's a telescope specific store that's kind of up in Seattle, or maybe a store that kind of does other things. So it's been kind of interesting seeing like, okay, Portland's not quite big enough to merit a telescope store, but maybe there's one that we can kind of go and poke around and see them
Yeah.
in person and do all that.
So where is your escape light pollution place that you would take it?
So I grew up out in the woods, just north of Portland. So that's where my other telescope was. My family still has kind of some land out there that's surrounded by timber companies
Right.
that over time they've harvested their trees. So it's a little bit more naked, kind of surrounding the the place where I can go out there. So that's one place that I have gone to kind of go be able to see. We are eyeing kind of, the southeast Oregon because I think they've designated some of the area out there specifically as like, the dark sky zone where there's less light pollution than a lot of other places.
Well, it is my understanding is there is a point in southeastern Oregon, right when you get, all the way down to the southeastern kind of corner of the state, where you are further from population centers than anywhere else in the nation. I mean, there's nobody, and so there's very, very little light pollution. The stars are, I mean, shockingly bright because there's no one out there. So yeah, that would be a great one. It's quite a hike, and you get out there, and you are, it's a long drive, and you're some of that end of that drive is not roads. I mean, it's dirt roads, very rutted, that kind of thing. But it's a really cool place if you can get out into that area. So yeah, that highly recommend anybody go way out into Southeast Oregon, and it's great camping and stuff, and don't stay. The value of it is that there are so few people. Um, so what else has been taking up your attention in terms of your daydreaming lately?
Yeah, so I mean like throughout my life I've always kind of wondered like how do we bring writing and poetry to people? How do we make it relevant and important? How can we find ways to inject it in places where people would be receptive um, to words on the page? And there have been various things like, let's put it on a bus. And sometimes I see that and I'm like, oh, cool. And then I read the poem and I'm like, okay, well, that one's not for me.
Yeah,
Or it's like, okay, well, I can see some kind of cool things going on in that poem. So there is some work that I've put toward like figuring out what posters I would create of my own work, kind of either just the words or kind of pairing words and pictures and kind of maybe posting those around or selling them or finding ways to kind of get that out. And that's kind of, the standard, the modern, like, hey, let's try to capture everybody's attention. So,
right.
competing still with everything else that's trying to capture people's attention.
Well, it's a
But yeah,
cool
there's
idea. I
just
like that, like how to, how to change not only the the medium to some extent, because it's not just a book now, it's, recognizing that these words can be on a poster, but it's also changing the geography. Oh yeah, and I experienced this while I was out in the world in this place or that place, or I put it up on my wall and it's now, it's not in a book, it's on, it's art on the wall. So yeah, where are you at in that process? That's pretty cool.
So I use GIMP as a photo editing,
Hmm. Love
and
it.
then Scribus is another one that is a free and open source software. So GIMP and Scribus are kind of two of the tools that I've got a little bit of a handle on. Started to kind of work with designing and arranging, figuring out like, okay, what are the poems that I think would be well suited to put on a wall and would garner attention versus, someone who's interested in poetry and reading a book and is like, okay, I can read through these 37 lines. Like that requires a little bit more attention and, you're probably there for it. So some of the ones that I've started to kind of the micropoetry for microplanets is a great one to be turning into posters, and I've kind of started on in part because it's haiku-sized pieces, so there's not a whole lot of words. There is a little bit of nonfiction as well that I'm not sure if I want to include on the poster or not. Um, and then I also had reached out to Gowrie Savor, who's a artist that I know, and so she had done these illustrations that are in the book. So they're just kind of, little sketches of the dwarf planets, but they pair nicely and it gives it a little bit more than just kind of the words. So it's, a collaboration there. And so that's one thing I like about the book, but also I've been kind of thinking, okay, well, if I make little square posters, this is a good way to get it on the wall, to get it where people might want to have a favorite dwarf planet and or
Yeah.
maybe buy the whole set kind of thing. I do live
Well,
in a capitalist world,
but
trying to
also I
exist
think about
in
there's a restaurant in Corvallis that has like a space in an alley next to the restaurant, and they have framed work just for the public. Like you're literally walking down the alley, and I can imagine, getting a bunch of those kind of in sequence on, hey, you've got a bar in North Portland, and you've got a space that is just empty wall space, maybe even on the exterior of the building. And what if we did a sequence of these so people are walking by and then they're going, I should check out Brian's book. This is cool stuff. But they experienced it in this other way, in this other location. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, so finding ways or places to put it is certainly another part of that, figuring out, well, what could posters do? Where would they go? Lots of coffee shops kind of offer the featured artist of the month kind of thing. So, it's nice to be able to think that there's a way that I can be part of that as well, of like, there's the space that people myself included, go and get coffee and admire what the artists are doing, and then I can help contribute to beautifying the space.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's a great idea. Yeah. I wish you luck with that. I think that I would love that. Like that would be really cool. We do a lot of like cons, and having different ways for people to engage with your work so that it's, oh yeah, I can buy your book, or I can buy, I mean, and for you, having prints would be really great. So that there's, because it's so hard often if you have one product, even if people want to be supportive, they're like, I really like your work. I bought your chapbook, and now I'm done with you because there's nothing else you have for me. But if you could say, you're into prints and you're interested in the book, you're kind of also meeting people where they're at. I know it's capitalism, but it's also accommodating people and serving them in a positive way. So, yeah, I wish you luck with that. I think that's a cool idea.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about what is on your kind of to read pile? What have you been looking forward to?
Yeah. To read pile. Yeah, so one book that I had come across recently, so I know Annalee Newitz, I've read her work a fair bit. She came out with a nonfiction book called Stories Are Weapons.
Mm.
So it's kind of covers a lot of different ways that people have used stories for certain efforts. Getting kind of into the labor piece, a little bit of what you described.
Yeah, I just read a novel of hers, but I have not read this one yet. I will have to check that out. That sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it just came out this year. The publisher had offered a fun little patch, so I have the patch that I'm not quite sure yet what it'll go on.
Yeah.
Um,
With the book as the tail of the bomb. I like that a lot. That's clever.
so yeah, that's one that I'm looking forward to diving into a little bit more. I did go and see when they came to Powell's. I went to the event and got to hear them describe it, but they also have a podcast. So Annalee Newitz puts on a podcast with Charlie Jane Anders called Our Opinions Are Correct.
Oh,
So that's
nice.
another thing that's a lot of fun to listen to. So looking forward to seeing the book length stuff
Yeah.
from Annalee.
Yeah. Um,
Murderbot is one that I've been getting into. So I do
they are
have the
so much
third
fun.
book of that from the library ready to read.
Yes, the new one. What are we up to? Is that the newest one? Is the third one?
No,
I
it's
think there are
there are
five.
several of them.
Yeah, and there are a couple that are like the in between, like the I shouldn't be cynical about the fact that they're shorts that are kind of in between, but then I think there are five now that are the full novel length. And even the first one started off as like a novella, and they've kind of gotten bigger. But yeah, the newest one I highly recommend. It's really fun, so you will enjoy those. Folks who
Yeah, I
don't know
recently finished
Murderbot,
the second,
Murderbot is this
so
great
on to the
character
third.
who is a security robot who has become sentient and has this great kind of different way of perceiving humans as generally we are an annoyance, but we're an interesting annoyance. and and just has a great voice, and yeah, that's a really fun series.
Yeah, so another book is one that I was just a rando find from a thrift store. It's probably it's from like 1989, but it's called The History of the Future. So as you know, being kind of into science fiction, it's always interesting to kind of
Yeah.
look at what people used to think the future was going to look like, or what hopes and dreams they had, which I think kind of for me, it's always interesting to look at that as well, because it helps me to temper the expectations as you start hearing all these things of like, what is AI going to do for us? And it's like, well, you're
Yes,
sounding a lot like all these people from 300 years
exactly. We
ago
were
that said,
supposed
you
to
know,
all
the
be
steam
living
engine
in
was
the
gonna,
Jetsons by now, so slow your roll.
yeah. So
Yes.
that's fun. I'm also just, you know, a sucker for random reference books. So I have
So is it a reference book that was like, here in 1989, this is how we believe the world will be? Or was it, here's a history of predictions going backwards and their
um
kind of accuracy or inaccuracy?
I don't know. I haven't read enough of it
Oh
yet.
yeah, this is your TBR pile. That sounds wonderful. I will have to check that out as well.
But yeah,
I teach
so
a sci-fi lit class, and we kind of talk about the relationship between science fiction and futurism and making it clear to the students those are not the same thing. Like a science fiction author is not trying to accurately predict this is where we will be. That's a futurist's job, and it's a real job, and you can actually, make a good living as a futurist if you can predict where the stock market is going to go. That's a different, calling, but there is a relationship there that's fun. What did our science fiction authors predict that has become accurate, wildly inaccurate,
right. Well, and that's an interesting point too, because, you know, a lot of times when people talk about, oh, science fiction and predicting the future, and talking about the technology, like that's usually not like the main focus of what the
Yeah.
writer's trying to talk about. They're trying to understand how do we as humans interact with that? How should we be treating each other because of this? Or what are our concerns about how we live our lives differently because this thing exists or
Yeah.
could exist or
Yeah, I mean, even if I had like, a very strong belief that, oh, in this year we will have this technology, as a science fiction writer, if that doesn't serve my story, I would be like, nope, they don't have that because I need to tell the story. That's more, that's my role, that's my responsibility, is to tell this satisfying, interesting story, and not to try and figure out when will, exactly will we have jetpacks.
right. And I
Stuff.
mean, I do poetry, right? So like it's tends to be even smaller, and it's like the text itself isn't always the full story. It's just kind of an avenue into the conversation, and then it's like bringing that further, and offering one perspective that I might not entirely agree wholeheartedly with, but it's part of the conversation of saying, well, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Or how does that fit into the overall conversation? So, you know, there's the text and then there's the ongoing conversations that go from there.
Well, and I'm sure you've experienced this with your poetry as well. So often my poetry is even more transient. Like the book takes 3 years to write. The poem might be how I'm feeling today about this thing, and I may feel differently about it tomorrow.
Right.
And it's a snapshot of I want and then there's that process of going through and deciding what gets into the chapbook, where you go, that was a way I was feeling that day, and it doesn't need to be preserved. There are way more poems than end up in the work, but yeah, I mean, they are, like you said, there's a lot more than just the text. There's, that white space contains a lot in poetry.
Yeah. Others on the to do or to read list. So I'm part of a graphic novel book club. There's books with pictures, you know, within reach of me here. So I go about once a month and read and it tends to be, you know, a fairly quick read. So that's one thing that I like about the graphic novels. But a whole range of stuff that they select, and I've been appreciating going there and seeing a whole range of different ones. But the one that's on the list for next month is called Rare Flavors by Ram V. So excited to get in on that. We had read another book by Ram V that was a lot of fun. This one, Rare Flavors, has a little bit more cannibalism than some of the other books that we've read, but we'll see where it goes.
With recipes. ROMV. Okay, I will. I'll be sure to link to that in the show notes so folks can
Yeah,
check them out.
RAMV, the letter V. And we had just finished this month. We read Spirit World. That was by Alyssa Wong, and that's in the DC universe. Although it's, I think, a newer character that has kind of been inserted there. So they drag in a few others that you might be familiar with if you're into the kind of the DC world. But it was a lot of fun to kind of read through that one. So
Yeah.
that's another one that I enjoyed a lot, and probably wouldn't have known too much about or picked up without having been part of the book club. So
Yeah, where is that book club, through a comic shop or library, or how did you find that group?
yeah, so it's the Books with Pictures is the comic shop that's here on like
Oh,
Southeast Division. So we that's where we go and meet and talk about it and buy the book from there as well. But yeah, so the name of the group is Books with Pals at Books with Pictures, and it's a small group, and
yeah.
we read and talk about it, and yeah, it's a
Oh,
lot of
that's
fun.
great. That's yeah, those kinds of opportunities to, discover new stuff. We're in the process of launching a book club for the company so that we can get the word out about our authors' books, and hopefully getting folks to form exactly those kinds of groups wherever they are and say, "Oh yeah, here's a, a Not a Pipe Publishing book," because it is really helpful to have that kind of collaborative way to engage with the text. Like, oh,
Yeah,
this
and
is,
it
we all understand this in this new way because it was introduced to us together.
Yeah, and hopefully it's a good way, to get mileage out of this thing that has been put out into the world and back with what I was talking about, like how do we make it relevant? How do we make it interesting and impactful? Like having it be part of the conversation is, part of impacting how people then the next day go and interact with the world. So
Yeah. So, uh, I want to make sure that we find out where folks can find you online. So, where can folks find your work?
um yeah, so I am online at bugthewriter.com. So Brian U. Garrison, bugthewriter.com is where they can find me online. I've had a few recent pieces coming out. So Nature Triumphs is an anthology of eco horror that's got a few of my poems.
Cool.
There was the Cozy Cosmic book that came out a while ago, and so I have a
Yes.
poem in the one that's even cozier cosmic. So I really like my poem Before the Beginning that will be in there.
When does that
I
next
have,
one, that even cozier? I've got Cozy Cosmic on my TBR pile right over here, but when does the sequel come out?
I think that they have pre-orders going on right now.
Oh, good.
And yeah, so it should be released pretty soon. They're trying to catch the Lovecraft Film Festival to have some like release
Yeah,
readings
smart.
kind of
So
at the
even
same time with
cozier
that.
cosmic. And the people in there are, yeah, that's a great bunch of. It's so nice when you get to work with other writers that you're like, I really enjoy just having my work surrounded by their work. These are really good people, and those are great folks.
Yeah, I'm looking
That's
forward to
great.
kind
And
of some
so
of those
everybody can find
readings.
all links to all that at bugthewriter.com.
I will add a link to some of those. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, I will put that link in there. And I did want to ask you also about, so you've got Nature Triumphs, even Cozy or Cosmic. There are a couple others, right? You've had uh, stuff coming out lately.
Yeah, so I submit around to magazines, and so there's a number of places that include poetry as well as short stories. So I have one, I'm not quite sure when it'll be coming out in Asimov's science fiction. That one's called Closing Time, and kind of it's a little bit the jukebox at the end of the universe. So that's one theme that I've been kind of using in my writing lately is the jukebox and music and kind of
Yeah.
doing some interesting ways of being speculative with that and seeing how we can kind of get a little bit surreal. And then in fantasy and science fiction, one of the other magazines that's been going for a while, I have one coming out called Jukebox of the Deep Sea. So kind of
Well,
different
and
places,
folks
different
out there who
locations.
are sci-fi fans are going, like, Asimov's is, nostalgia, but also like, the big name, like and then Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine is yeah, that's a biggie. So those, congratulations on both those. That's
Thank you.
really cool. That's a nice feather in your science fiction cap for, but with both of those.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
I'm excited to be in there.
So I also wanted to ask you, who would be your recommendation for somebody else I should have on this show?
Yeah, so there's John Paul Garnier is one of them. I know him in part because he was the one that created my book, Micropoetry for Microplanets. But he's got a bookstore down in Joshua Tree. He's the editor of Starline, just an all around, community builder and wonderful person to talk to. So I think you and him would
Oh
certainly
yeah,
have
that'd be
lots of
great.
good stuff to talk about. Our Thursday is another poet that I know in the area. So they're kind of here in the Northwest, a little kind of closer to the Seattle side of things. But I had first encountered their work when they got the second place in the Riesling award for their poem called "Why Did White People Conquer the World for Spices and Then Never Use Them?"
Which I love so much. That's
So
great.
they're a lot of fun. Jordan Hirsch is another poet that I know. She's been helping the SFPA lately as the treasurer. And she's got a new book out called Both Worlds of Poetry. So excited to see where that poetry goes. And then some other folks that I've run into that they're not poets, but I've really just enjoyed their presence. And when I've
Yeah.
seen them like at NorWestCon or the Portland Book Festival. So Shiv Ramdas, he's just got like an energy and no nonsenseness to his point of views that he's willing to share.
Yeah.
So look him up definitely if you're not familiar with him. I have one of his books a little deeper maybe on my to read pile.
Yeah.
And then Kendara Blake, she writes some stuff that's fairly dark and like kind of ghost stories or like this really dark fantasy world. But in person, like she's hilarious to see like on panels or in interviews. So even if I don't get to hang out with them in person, like if it's just vicariously hearing you hang out with them on the
Yeah.
podcast, I just want to hear more of them speaking.
Well, and Kandari, but I love the folks who write the really grim stuff, and then you meet them and they're, just, warm and you're like, oh yeah, that's how you process really hard stuff, and so that you're not bringing it, like I know a lot of horror writers who are like the sweetest, most wonderful people, and you're like, this
Right. Yeah.
work is brutal, and it's just, like, yeah, it's because they got that out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be cool. That would be great folks to have on. Well, there's some folks I need to thank before we get to our kind of advice for our listeners. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3Ds. And thanks to Halisna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on the show, I'd love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email me about that. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making this show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipePublishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com and check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. If you like this show, rate it and review wherever you found it. Check out Brian's Micropoetry for Microplanets. Tell a friend about it. Even that, clicking on that fifth star and writing a little bit about why it was meaningful to you will make Brian's day. So please leave a review. It really does make a big difference. And I am too old to say smash that like button, but if you could gently tap on the like button for this show an odd number of times, I would greatly appreciate that. So Brian, as folks are going into their week, what is something you'd like them to remember this week?
Yeah. So to quote Kekla Magoon, another writer, she said, "A drop in the bucket is only a drop, but many drops in a bucket can quench a thirst, cleanse a surface, douse a fire. A drop in the bucket is powerful because of what it is part of. We can all be part of something bigger."
Yep, I don't even want to add to that. So we will end with that, except to say that, remember in this next week, no matter how much you procrastinate, Brian and I are still proud of you.
If I take my time.